Now, on the agenda, we have House File 498, Chair Hansen's bill, and I will move that it's House File 498 be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus transportation finance and policy bill. Representative Hansen, you are always welcome in the Transportation Committee. Please let us know about your bill, and then we'll have some additional testimony and discussion. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Hornstein and members of the committee. House File 498 was in front of this committee, I believe, 2 years ago in a different form, or with a different number at least. And it is the Highways for Habitat program, trying to encourage pollinator habitat in our rights-of-ways. In addition, it also has a very popular program, Living Snow Fences, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So the House File 498 is a bill that was in front of the committee, did move through the committee, I think was into the omnibus bill, had some appropriation for living snow fences, I believe, but just didn't make it across the finish line. So since we've moved these bills, or introduced these bills in prior years, there's been some activity at the federal level. I think some grant availability for Highways for Habitat type of programs from the federal government, as there's been a strong realization that our public right-of-ways are an opportunity for habitat. I do have a DE1 amendment to get the bill in the shape I would like, if the chair could move that.
Representative Hansen, I will move the DE1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And members, the DE1 provides some definitions. It establishes the program, establishes an account, describes integrated roadside vegetation management. I do want to just note, prior to me being here, I worked at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and did the pesticide applicator training, trained MnDOT employees in conjunction with the University of Minnesota, and integrated roadside vegetation management is nothing new. It has been around for over 20 years. We were teaching people about that. There's been, sometimes there's an ebb and flow of interest, but IRVM has been around and has been really kind of the language that is used for managing our rights-of-ways. It talks about developing the management standards, so it's clear what those standards are. It would require a report back to you and members of the committee. And then rather than being quite prescriptive on ditch management, it provides the IRV language that gives some discretion to the commissioner. And I want to be clear, this applies only to MnDOT rights-of-ways, not other county road authorities. They're encouraged to have IRVM, but it is required for MnDOT rights-of-ways. It talks about pollinator habitat asset management, a management plan, so we can have some look forward on what we're going to be doing. And then it provides a $1 million appropriation from the general fund for the habitat program, a one-time appropriation. We know we've got a lot of one-time money. This would be good to get the program kick-started. And then for living snow fences, it has a $2 million appropriation one time from the general fund to the Commissioner of Transportation for implementation of living snow fences, so we can get those in the ground and have them starting to stop snow and provide habitat. And I think, Chair Hornstein, you have, once we adopt this amendment, you also have an awesome video to show us about living snow fences.
Very good one. Okay, so members, just to review, because I think this is one of the first times we've done this, session, we're just simply going to incorporate this DE1 amendment, and that will be the bill. So this is really just a motion to get the bill in the shape that Chair Hansen would like us to discuss it in. And then we will have, I would anticipate, a fairly robust discussion then of the DE1 after the testimony. So members, I will move that adoption of the DE1 amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye. 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 All those opposed, the motion prevails. So we have House File 498 as amended before us. And so I think per Chair Hansen's last comment, I'll just introduce this short video As an urban legislator, I was not familiar with living snow fences until Chair Hansen brought this bill up last year. I happened to be just watching the local news a couple months ago, and one of our local TV stations had a segment on living snow fences, and I found it very educational and helpful. So look at this as sort of a living snow fences 101, and I think it's a good way to introduce at least part of the bill that Chair Hansen is presenting. So with that, we'll cue the video.
Caused by climate change. We learned we spend close to $100 million every year to clear snow and ice from Minnesota roads.
Seems like a lot, right? From giant plows and maintenance to de-icing material and labor, all of that adds up. But there is a way to cut down on costs, crashes, and the impact on the environment. I took a drive 90 minutes west of the cities to learn that all it takes is some collaboration from Minnesota landowners across the state. Pass along Highway 212 in Bird Island, Minnesota, and you'll see Vern Prokosh's place. You put it up there?
Well, not physically. I told somebody what to do.
A hard-to-miss roadside attraction that's popular with parents and their little ones in the back seat.
We have some people that come from Wisconsin that drive by here a couple times a year, and they said that we just wait for the kids, just wait for the smiling barn.
But what those travelers may not know is that there's something else in his yard, keeping them safer on the roads.
So this particular highway experiences about 4,300 cars a day. At this particular site here in Vern site, there used to be 2 big snow drifts that form on either side of his building site here.
This is a living snow fence, a wall of trees, bushes, grasses, and wildflowers that blocks blowing snow from the highway.
Front ones were plum brush.
Vern at some point was growing corn out here, but here's how it worked. The state came in and paid for the land, and then a combination of state and federal dollars paid for all the trees, bushes, shrubs, and flowers that are here now. The state, of course, also now maintains the land.
What the intent is to manage the wind. The amount of snow that gets carried by the wind can be 100 times greater than the amount that just falls from the sky.
Snow fences can look like this or this. From natural elements to rows of unharvested corn to plastic barriers. It all depends on the site, and MnDOT says they work. Here's a look at a stretch of I-94 westbound near Moorhead with snow fencing. MnDOT says the winds were blowing 30 miles an hour on this day. Now, a look at the highway where the snow fencing ends. Look at those drifts on the right shoulder. This video shows 2-foot drifts on that highway without protection. As you can imagine, snow fencing cuts down on crashes.
We find that if we're on a curve, the snow fencing can reduce the crash severity by about 40%.
Of course, MnDOT saves money and resources plowing less, but all of this is also positive for the environment. Living fences like this one sequester carbon and provide great nesting habitat for wildlife. They also cut down on the chemical treatments we use on the roads.
We're trying to reduce our chloride use, and chlorides are tied to salt. So the snow fences help keep the road warmer so that the salt's more effective. So you can use less salt that way.
Some snow fencing is on state property, but a lot of it is on private property, a network of nearly 350 landowners across the state. Gullickson says some landowners have reservations about the program because it does require space on their property. But he wants to stress landowners are compensated and they try to be creative to come up with solutions together.
We have found that the public safety and mobility is what really drives landowners to do this, more so than the financial part of it.
They want their roads clear.
They want their roads clear.
Vern says it's made a difference.
We used to get a lot of company from people that got stalled in here, but now we don't have as much company as we used to have.
People knocking on the door needing a push or something.
Right.
His neighbors sure appreciate it.
Our neighbor here thinks it's a great project because he doesn't hardly get any snow in his yard anymore.
Maybe it even helped you on a trip along Highway 212, and you didn't even realize it.
Well, it's doing what we wanted it to do.
It's helped to keep cars driving through.
And if you have a problem area near your home, MnDOT says it never hurts to reach out to them. They are looking to collaborate with more landowners, so they'll be able to work with you to see if a snow fence would even be helpful in your area.
Research shows nostalgia can help you remember ads.
Thank you. Found that very helpful. Chair Hansen, you can proceed with your bill presentation.
Thank you, Chair Hornstein. And some may wonder, why do we have the highways for habitat with the living snow fences? Well, they can complement each other. You saw in the video where you have habitat near the road that can provide pollinator habitat and catch snow. And so it's a kind of a comprehensive list of tools that are there for the MnDOT road managers. Again, this is only on MnDOT highways, not road authorities, counties, townships, et cetera. They're encouraged but not required. And I believe there are testifiers.
Thank you so much. And we will have an opportunity to question Chair Hansen and have a committee discussion after the public testimony. So we have Tina Markison.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
My name is Tina Markison. I work for MnDOT in the Office of Environmental Stewardship. And so we'll just dive in. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Tina Markison. I work for the Office of Environmental Stewardship as the Roadside Vegetation Management Unit Supervisor. MnDOT manages interstate, U.S., and state highway rights-of-way for multiple reasons that are including but not limited to maintaining engineered base and slopes for support of infrastructure, water infiltration and conveyance, blowing snow like you just saw, survey markers and roadside weather stations, aesthetics including screening to and from adjacent land uses, and also habitat for protected species. House File 498 contains much of the work and practices that MnDOT already has in place. Some of these examples are we use integrated roadside vegetation management, like Representative Hansen mentioned earlier. It's not a brand new concept, and it's something that MnDOT has been using in the 20 years that I've been with MnDOT. Roadside vegetation management includes mowing, biological controls, herbicides, prescribed fire, mechanical tree removal and brush removal, native plantings of grasses, wildflowers, shrubs, and trees. We also have MnDOT's sustainability plan that targets the planting of native seeds, trees, shrubs, and perennials on MnDOT's large projects. As part of that sustainability plan, the goal or the target is to have 75% of acres planted with native seed, 80% of plants on urban projects are native material, 90% of plants on rural projects are native material. The reason why these numbers are not 100% is because not all right-of-way is appropriate for the creation of pollinator habitat and or native plants. We are developing specialized maintenance plans for specific areas on our roadsides where changes to standard maintenance practices are needed in order to maintain habitat for these protected species. We also partner with and use plans created by DNR and Bowser, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, to help guide seed mixes, establishment, and maintenance activities. Finally, I'd like to recommend 4 modifications or clarifications to the bill. We will continue to work together with DNR and Bowser on the, however, the needs, soils, and follow-up maintenance on right-of-way and versus the typical lands revegetated by the DNR and Bowser greatly differ. Instead of using their guidelines as pointed out in the bill, we would like to see specific roadside vegetation establishment guidelines. While the one-time appropriation will be used to enhance MnDOT's existing roadside vegetation management, the funding is short-term. This short-term funding structure is similar to the DNR's Roadsides for Wildlife program, which ebbs and flows when grants and state legislative funding is available. If the goal is to establish a program similar to Iowa's county roadside programs, then long-term funding is needed. As the answer to that long-term funding question in Iowa, the Iowa legislature created a trust fund, the Iowa Living Roadsides Trust Fund, to fund roadside vegetation management in Iowa. Clarification is needed regarding language definitions that are listed in the bill. Some of these include on line 3.25, right-of-way mile. That is not a term that is used in MnDOT, and I'm not sure what the definition is. Another term that needs to be defined is other chemicals, listed on line 413. There's also a potential conflict with the noxious weed law that needs to be addressed. As stated in the beginning, there are multiple needs that MnDOT uses our right-of-way to address. MnDOT will need some allowances to prioritize these other needs above pollinator habitat in order to maintain the road infrastructure and safety. We continue to monitor and fund scientific research on roadside vegetation management and update standard practices as successful research is completed. We are happy to work with the bill author to address these issues. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for your testimony. And are there any questions of the testifier? Chair Hansen.
Mr. Chair, I think all of these things are achievable. Be up to the committee for ongoing funding. So of course I would ask if you wanted to do that, that would be great.
We'll take a look at the Iowa example here. I know that's a little dangerous to say, but we will. Yes, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So question, do we have an estimate of how many miles of ditches this particular program would apply to? Can you explain to us how it would be administered? Pretend I'm a landowner on one of these state highways, which I don't own the land, but I farm on a piece of land that could potentially be affected by this. Can you walk me through, pretending I was the person that made all the decisions with my farm, which I'm not, but can you walk through how this will be implemented and especially how it will affect farmers?
Yes.
Proceed. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and committee, MnDOT owns approximately 175 acres of green space. That includes our roadsides and also median areas. So it's kind of our land minus all the impermeable pavement areas. Oh, I'm sorry. 175,000. Yes, 175,000 acres, give or take. And so not all of these areas would be underneath the pollinator program. There is ongoing research right now as to how close to roads pollinator habitat is beneficial and how much of it is a population sink. So we bring the insects in and then they leave that site and there's cars. So, how much of that is not beneficial. So we would be looking at less than 175,000 acres. We don't have an exact number on where all of these areas and where the potential areas are. In order to figure out, where to prioritize our efforts, we do use the DNR's Prairie Plan to try to make some of those connections of those conservation lands that the DNR has identified when we do have projects going through those areas. Now, if you're a farmer, this program would only affect MnDOT's roadside. And so how it would affect your land, you'd have potentially pollinator habitat adjacent to your property, but it would not extend onto your property. It would be contained within MnDOT's roadsides and right-of-way. Does that answer your question, or is there additional?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I'm getting this straight, so I have a field that's on 169, all right? So I assume that is a road that would be within the purview of the state of Minnesota. My ditch, the ditch that we bale yearly in order to provide food for animals, especially seeing as now there was such a crazy drought in South Dakota, farmers from Minnesota are making considerable amounts of money selling that hay to individuals in South Dakota who are having a hard time feeding their animals to make their living. Can you explain to me how that will work with regards to my ditch on 169? So
anytime that adjacent landowners or other third party wish to access the right-of-way, we ask that that person apply for a permit from MnDOT in order to be on the right-of-way. And that just makes sure that the two parties are communicating any concerns that are out there. We've worked with farmers in a couple areas of the state where we've got pollinator habitat, and we've said, this is our goal. Mowing and haying is not totally off the table because it can be a management technique. We just need to have those communications so that we are understanding the needs of the right-of-way and making sure that those are being maintained. But it's that combination and that communication between the person who's asking for the permit and MnDOT to make sure that the action is going to benefit all parties.
One more follow-up,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think to the committee, I think it's very important to understand that whereas I have a field on 169 that I farm, it is 217.8 acres tillable. We pay taxes for 220 acres because that we pay all the way to the center of the road. So whereas we're talking about this thing called the right-of-way, we pay taxes all the way to the center of the road. We pay taxes for that ditch. And when the department or when someone is coming into our area and telling us that the land that you pay the taxes up into the center of that road, you cannot utilize, that's when we start having real problems. I think there's a fine line, there's a balance. We've done this for hundreds of, we've paid taxes to the center of the road for 150 years. That's not gonna change. But I think when we start encroaching upon a farmer or an individual's ability to make money, that's where we start doing some real problems. So I'm not a huge fan of this idea. I think that there are ways in which we can better it in order to make sure that, I know a lot of farmers who are very conservation oriented. And so if it was, and I know that this allocation probably will not fully fund the 175,000 acres that you say that you control the right of way, that the farmers pay the taxes or the landowners pay the taxes to the center of the road for. I think that if we were to create a program in which those who want to, there are some ditches that are just dangerous to mow. You can't do that. You're going to tip your tractor over, you're going to have some issues. If there was a way in which farmers could benefit from putting that into something, I think that's a highly conducive relationship, and that's what we need to strive for. We can't sit here and say, sorry, you pay the taxes to the center of the road, but we control it and we get to do what we want. So that's a problem. So I would really appreciate moving forward, if this policy does become law, I would very much appreciate us working together with the farmers, those who are consciously conservation-minded, who are saying, I can't mow this, or I have no interest in mowing this, I don't have animals, and I don't want to take the time to do it. If we were to work with them and provide them with that ability before we start willy-nilly saying, hey, you've got a spot, the snow drifts, we're going to make a living snow fence there. There are areas where farmers are paid to leave one combine swipe growing. They just don't harvest it. And that is an amazing snow fence. So we can do that. We can work with the people who are trying to make a living in this state. We can do that, and we can do it effectively, and we can make sure that no one's toes are stepped on, and we can all achieve our goals. And I would ask that the department, if this becomes law, that they would look into making sure that this is a very, very amicable relationship between the farmers and the individuals within the department.
Thank you for your comments and questions, Representative Wilson. I think that Representative Hansen wanted to make a quick comment, and then we'll have Representative Petersburg and Representative Murphy. Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, when it's the public right-of-way, you may be paying taxes on it, but all of us are paying taxes and taking care of the rights-of-way management. We're all taking care of the road. And it's a public right-of-way. And there are differences among right-of-way ownership. So let's take, for example, Chair Hornstein, if for years I had a neighbor and then you moved next to me, and on the property that you had an apple tree. And every year for 100 years, my family were coming and getting the apples. But now you've moved on that. And you don't want me to take the apples anymore. Because you like the apple tree. And you're going to feed everybody in the neighborhood with that apple tree. Because there's a public benefit in that apple tree. There's a public benefit of putting in the living snow fences. And the farmers are compensated. That's the $2 million we're talking about. It's to go to the farmers to compensate them for the cornfield. And choices. What we're actually doing in the bill is providing discretion to the department so they can choose from a menu of options to work with landowners to make the best choices. But there's the whole, all of us, on the public right-of-way. And the public right-of-way is not for profit. It's for the public.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. Representative Petersburg and then Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wanted to just kind of emphasize what Representative Olson had talked about. When you do buy a farm, you buy the farm up to the middle of the road, and that's part of the land that you buy. And right-of-way is different than ownership. And I think that's a distinction, because the right-of-way is actually an easement that is granted to the state for use of that, not ownership, but the right to be able to use it, unless I'm wrong in that, if somebody can correct me if I'm wrong there. But that's an easement, that's there. And that means that there is still ownership, maintenance, and so forth that the farmer has. This DE takes away all of the previous negotiated decisions done for road ditch management and so forth prior to this. And I remember a few years ago how contentious that was, dealing with that. And so I think that's something we want to be real careful about when we decide how we do that, because road maintenance and road ditch maintenance also has a safety factor from deer and others that have to be determined. It's not just about snow removal either. And so I think we have to be very cautious about how we manage that. And I will like to read that a little bit in more detail to see exactly what's going on. But I do think, as the department has said, there are some things that still need to be worked out on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. And then our last committee member with a question or comment to this, Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. My experience is I've bailed those ditches for my whole life. I mean, before me, I bailed ditches on State Highway. We cared for those ditches too. I mean, they're the part of what keeps the grass down from being real tall next to the road. And there's plenty of accidents on the highway I grew up on. Certainly having options and thinking about those with regard to Representative Olson's comments is key. I mean, certainly to have options with corn alongside. On the other hand, in my county that I represent, Otter Tail and Douglas County, we have a lot of issues with wildlife. So if you know where the deer are going to cross, that's nice too. Because I personally met quite a few deer. And if these, depending on where the roads are crossing and where these snow fences are, and I guess my question to that is, are the snow fences ever going to be, or these vegetation areas, ever going to be an area that's alongside heavily wooded areas or grass like marsh areas, where in our area, there's plenty of deer traffic. And I know in my family, we're probably around 10 that we've hit. It's just really common up there to have damage and to have problems by hitting deer. So those are the two comments I'd like some response on. Thanks.
I think Chair Hansen is ready to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, maybe the committee would have an opportunity to look at what the federal programs are doing now with wildlife crossings. You're seeing a lot of work being done and funded, I think, through the Inflation Reduction Act on wildlife crossings. And that's not just for deer, but other critters. The scientists at MnDOT have a pretty good handle where there's a lot of crossings, because you just look at the data where the deer have been. And there's traditional areas where they cross, and there have been, whether it's tunnels or other, in some states with migration, we don't have migration with deer compared to elk or other herbivores, but they've actually built crossings over the road, and you can see where they go. So it's a fascinating area where there's been a lot of federal money. Obviously, we can't build a bridge everywhere where deer are going, but there's work being done on that to help identify and to do a better job of also alerting drivers on, rather than just the old deer crossing sign, but some efforts on managing wildlife. And the department can talk about the science a little bit, that what they do with IRVM to provide those research. When you look at some of the statute that we are changing, we're actually moving away from prescriptive, this is what you shall do, to giving them discretion to use the tools and the evolving science on this. It's that integrated roadside vegetation management, so that they can bring in and put in, you may find a planting that is more conducive to deer. It seems like they eat everything on my farm, but if you are, there's plantings, there's things that you can do, and there's a lot of science behind it.
Sounds like we were asking for a comment here, Ms. Markinson, if you so
Mr.
choose.
Mr. Chair and Committee, I am, as I mentioned before, I'm a roadside vegetation manager, and so we have a wildlife ecologist at MnDOT that would be much more, a better person to answer the questions regarding deer and deer crossing areas than I would be. But yes, we are looking at what's in our seed mixes and trying to figure out how to minimize that. But any place that there's vegetation, there's insects. Anywhere there's insects, there's going to be things that eat insects and sew up the food chain. So, so yeah, if your question is about wildlife crossing and deer crossings, I would request that we have an additional person who is not present today answer those questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll have one more question or comment from Representative Murphy, and then I'll ask if there's any additional testifiers, and then we'll have some closing comments from the author and move on. Representative Murphy.
Just in my experience, the deer aren't very good at reading the signs. They don't typically know where the crossings are. And unless you dictate what the farmer's gonna plant right there, we don't have much control. Just this last weekend, we went by just off the right of way, next to a farmyard. There was corn planted there left for the deer, but it's near an intersection, and the comment was it's really creating a lot of problems because we're hitting a lot of those deer. So just in general, I think the farmer should be a really key part of this conversation, not the afterthought of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to testify on House File 498? Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is just a question for you in general. Have we gotten any kind of indication from leadership yet on what kind of target you might be given? I mean, this uses $3 million out of general fund, and are there any indications that we may get some, a little or not? And I know it's early, but sometimes you get some precursors.
No, thank you for the question, Representative Petersburg. No, we don't have information on that
All right.
quite yet.
Thanks.
And there are, of course, as you correctly point out, we have a number of big ticket items. I think if you look at the bill from last year, that I think are still around. So
Right. Yeah, because this also takes money out of trunk highway fund, too,
Right,
which also
right.
uses, and that's a concern. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I don't see. I'm sorry. Representative Brand.
He wants to testify.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I just have one more comment
Sure.
in response to Representative Murphy, if I can, Mr. Chair.
You should proceed, Ms. Martinson.
So one of the things with the living snow fences and the standing corn rows that MnDOT pays for is it's really important that the structure of the corn plant be there, and that's really what's providing that protection to the road. We do not restrict the farmer from going in there and hand harvesting the corn. And so there has been in the past where a farmer has sponsored a 4-H group to come out and harvest, hand pick the corn. And then, there's some of that stuff going on as well. So it's really that the structure of the corn plant that MnDOT is interested in for for the standing corn rows when we are using that method, so.
Okay, we'll have a comment from Chair Hansen, then some brief testimony from Mr. Arnosti, and then we'll move on to the next bill. Chair Hansen.
And Representative Murphy, if you need anybody to hand harvest corn, I know some Amish farmers that would be happy to.
Great. So we'll hear from Mr. Arnosti briefly, and then we'll have closing comments from the bill author. Welcome to the committee. Please state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Don Arnosti. I'm here representing the Pollinator Friendly Alliance, which is a coalition of groups that are concerned and interested about our pollinators. I'd like to applaud Chair Hansen and the committee for hearing this bill. We think this is a really important step forward. Many, many years ago, more than a generation ago, there was just a broad fiat applied to how mowing should occur in the right-of-way for purposes of wildlife benefits, pheasants in particular. This is a much-needed update and increase in flexibility and tools that are being given to the department to apply modern science and the learning that's been done in 25 years that Iowa has been running a comparable program. There's a lot of research, which I didn't bring with me today, that Iowa has been able to do. Their Tallgrass Prairie Institute has been studying their roadside management for years, and it has to do with deer interactions and other wildlife impacts. And I'm going by memory because I didn't bring the study with me, but my memory is this kind of management actually reduces deer car impacts because the deer actually favor the freshly mowed surfaces. That's the browse that they like, and they're drawn to those freshly mowed surfaces, and somewhat older vegetation is less attractive to deer. There are many benefits from this type of management, certainly for birds and pollinators, but also for reduced maintenance. And again, this has been proven by research in Iowa, reduced maintenance and improved performance of the right-of-way in terms of water control and erosion control. So I thank you very much for hearing the bill, and we urge you to work out the minor issues, really, that I think MnDOT brought up and included in legislation passed this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnosti. Great, well, thank you. I'll just make a couple of quick comments and then hand it over to Chair Hansen for the last word. Appreciate again the really constructive engagement of the committee with this. And, this is really both for this bill and the next bill we're about to hear, this is why we do hearings. We want to get the issues out, vetted, and, return to them. And, this bill will probably be in a potentially different form with, based on some of the comments that were made today and the suggestions that MnDOT had made. And, we'll work closely with the author on those. And so the bill will come back. But I think this hearing was incredibly important in terms of, vetting some of the issues. And so with that, I will ask for any closing comments from the author, Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I don't think we're that far apart. I think there are things we can work on to clarify and make sure that we're, there are differences where there has been fee title acquisition versus easement, and maybe we can delineate that. I think there's things we can work on with MnDOT. As I said, it's not that far apart. Be happy to work with anybody on the committee, particularly those that are interested in ongoing funding, Mr. Chair. So happy to work with you. This is an opportunity with one-time dollars. I think for the living snow fences particularly, to get those out. It's a proven program. And then I think the Highways for Habitat also provides a way to reach federal dollars that could be coming to our state to be working with people. So I'd ask for your support. I appreciate the opportunity and the ability to lay this over.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks to the committee for a great discussion. Thanks to MnDOT too as well. With that, House File 498 is laid over.